Hello, everyone. Gary here from Timeline Astrology. This is the February 2024 forecast and focusing on the sidereal transits. So there is a lot going on in February. So forewarned, if you don't want to hear about the potential of wars and further wars and escalation of current wars, I would suggest you tune out now. Perhaps listen to this if you are going to listen to it when you're feeling more centered and more able to listen to what is potentially a very challenging time, the beginning of essentially a very challenging time. But at the same time, your awareness of these transits that are very powerful in February. There's some really powerful transits going on. If you can channel them in the best way possible, there's so much you can do with them yourself personally. So I am going to mention the world and how it might impact the world. And I will also mention how you could approach these in a way that you find more empowerment. Because it's so disempowering to say, okay, there's a potential escalation in wars and maybe even if like a surprise attack somewhere that leads to yet another war. I mean, what can you do with that kind of knowledge? But if you understand the transits that are potentially triggering this kind of situation, you could use those transits in your own life to break through some blocks, for example, and overcome some limitations. And they are certainly the themes of February. Now, blocks and limitations and breaking through blocks are essentially because of two planets, and that is Saturn and Mars. Saturn more especially because it rules all of the planets in February, essentially. It is either ruling them or it's aspecting them. It's doing something with all the planets, really. Mars is moving into Capricorn along with the other planets, Mercury and Venus. And so Saturn rules all the planets in Capricorn, and then the Sun moves into Aquarius mid-month and then meets with Saturn. And then Saturn also aspects Jupiter and Uranus in Aries. So Saturn really is ruling the roost. And we're going to feel a Saturn type of theme in February stronger than we've even felt in January. We have felt it in January, and we've felt it for years now since it moved into Capricorn in 2020. And along with Pluto, it brought all of the lockdowns and the kind of meltdown of everything essentially. Now that Saturn's in Aquarius, though, it's bringing the story further into this new innovative sort of approach to technologies that can help with instigating this new technology, new systems that replace the old ones that are collapsing. That's essentially what's happening. But Saturn now ruling all these planets, and especially when then planets conjoin Saturn, as they will after moving into Capricorn the following month, March, and into April, they join Saturn. Everything feels a bit constrained. Now, that is not a bad thing necessarily when I say things like February has the potential for some major surprise attacks and escalation in wars. Saturn is absolutely not a bad thing in that case because Saturn ruling all these planets may hold things back. So let's hope that is the case, that Saturn, i.e., fear of the consequences, holds things back. That whoever was considering doing that, whatever government was planning on an attack, don't do that. But it's still a potential. So I'll show you here and why it's a potential. So if we look at how the planets progress and we look at Mars conjoined Pluto, especially as a major trigger, obviously, the actual exact conjunction is on Valentine's Day. That's interesting. I mean, plan that as you will. I don't know what Valentine's might be like for couples across the table, but certainly I think this is probably best expressed in some more conscious and mature way. Mars, Pluto conjoined in Capricorn. Interestingly enough, the last time Mars Pluto came together with Venus here in Capricorn was March 2022. That's when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock on stage at the Oscars. Now, why would I say that? And why would that have any meaning for us? Is that, well, first of all, when that happened, everybody saw it. So it made us all aware of this kind of dynamic. And essentially, it's the dynamic of being sort of triggered, Mars, Pluto. But it was Venus, so it was about his wife, right? So it's almost like a proxy slap, right? So if we think about it in the context of current wars and the situations in around the world, and especially in terms of the US more so, this is where I feel things are likely to be triggered. And also in relation to Ukraine and China, because the charts I have for both Ukraine and China have Capricorn rising. So again, whether it's an escalation and surprise attack from Ukraine or within Ukraine, or it's a surprise attack from China, I think the US is going to be heavily involved in this because of a couple of things. One major thing is that, well, first of all of these planets gathering in Capricorn is for the US independence chart, the third host sign. So if I actually bring that forward and imagine it from Scorpio, the chart I use for the 4th of July, 1776, has Scorpio rising. That's sidereal Scorpio, tropical Sagittarius. So that is the third host sign. All of the planets, including Pluto, in the third sign of war, of fighting. Now, it's just not very obvious because of Pluto. And again, that's why I say a proxy war. Pluto hides things. So the fact that now all these planets, and especially Mars, which tends to externalize things, like push things out into our awareness quite abruptly sometimes, like a slap, this could be something that's coming up more obvious. The other thing is that Pluto is, for the first time in 2024, and the first of 3 times, Pluto will exactly return to where it was during the independence in 1776. So February is the first time that happens. So Pluto return for the US chart, US independence, could show not just wars of US with other countries or proxy wars, but maybe even internal strife and civil war. This could be a trigger in a major way, in many ways, as you can see now already. The fact that Mars is now aspecting planets in Aries, Jupiter and Uranus, which are coming closer and closer together throughout February, March, and into April. By the end of April, they conjoin exactly at the end of Aries. This is worrisome also because the last time this happened in this sector of the zodiac was 1941. And 1941 was when the US entered World War II because of Pearl Harbor. Again, a surprise attack. Uranus, Jupiter in Aries is that, and aspected by Mars is just that, a surprise attack. I mean, I don't know how else to read this. And in fact, in 1941, they'd moved into Taurus, aspected by Mars. So it's not even as volatile as this one is. So when we see this kind of volatility, the only thing we can hope for really is that Saturn's aspect onto Aries also will restrain things. So we have Mars aspecting Aries, but also Saturn. And so this could be where there could be something that happens that escalates or some surprise attack, but then Saturn maybe holds it or contains it within a certain region or within certain borders. Now, again, the other side of that, the flip side of Saturn's strength, is that there are going to be a lot of border issues in February, and quite obviously in migration and all of that. And, you know, the Texas border and all of that being a major issue at the moment, all of that is likely to be an issue and continue to be an issue. Now, what happens subsequent to all of these conjunctions with Pluto in Capricorn is that Sun moves into Saturn's other sign, Aquarius, and then is opposite its nature. Its nature is Leo. So what happens here is that we're going to see by the 28th of February, we're going to see the Sun, Saturn, and Mercury all conjoin at the same degree, 15 degrees of Aquarius. This is where, again, if we consider what may have happened at this point in terms of an escalation in war or a surprise attack, this could likely show protest. So whether it's a war situation or not, though, this Saturn-Sun combination usually shows protest, but more especially because it's in the sign Aquarius, opposite the Sun sign. So leaders and governments are definitely going to be challenged by the end of February in whatever they're doing. And like I said, protests maybe. And the fact that Mercury's in the mix here as well is another side of that, that there's going to be a lot of talk about this, basically. Now, Saturn, having said that, despite its strength, and this is maybe another reason why I'm a bit worried about this escalating in a big way, is because Saturn is now combust. So as strong as it is in Aquarius, it's now conjoined the Sun, so not visible. And so when you can't see Saturn, you can't see the sort of structure. Like, for example, personally, this might be a challenge to us to kind of stay on track because we can't see the results of what we're doing. Right. And so if you can't see the results of what you're doing, you might kind of, you know, give up on that, first of all. It's important to obviously stick with it if you're meant to be doing it. If you're not meant to be doing it, maybe drop it, because that's another sign here of all the planets in the 12th from Saturn, Mars, Venus, and Pluto. Maybe, okay, that thing that you were, resolved to stick with for 2024, maybe it's fallen by the wayside already at this stage. But if it hasn't, maybe this is the time to consider whether you do have to drop it for your own health and well-being. Saturn-Sun combinations tend to challenge us and challenge our authority on any kind of thing. Are you going to be able to do that? Can you really follow through with that? Have you got the energy, the time to be able to do that? Is that what you're meant to be doing anyway? So it kind of leads to almost like an identity crisis in a sense. And Mercury here is just adding to this kind of angst nature in a way in February. So what we need to do with this and be mindful of, and the world is going to have to deal with in some way, is how do we sort of plow through here and do what we must without overdoing it? That's essentially the kind of conundrum we're facing in February. How do we keep going without making it worse? How do we keep going and breaking through our personal limitations while, not creating more problems? And that's essentially the problem of Saturn and Mars. Mars in Saturn signs, like Mars is exalted in Capricorn, Saturn sign. Why is that? I mean, why would planet Mars be exalted in Saturn sign? Saturn is about constraint and limitation. Why would Mars, a very youthful energy and like kind of very exuberant and wants to just do it and not think about it, be exalted in Saturn sign? It's simply because if we can channel the Saturn type of focus and be really deliberate in our actions, then we can get a lot done. We can achieve a great deal. Mars creates problems when it's just sort of just willy-nilly sort of just doing things and not thinking about them and actually lashing out and creating problems like slapping people, right? Arguing with people, creating more problems than you need really in your life. Like sometimes you do need to stand up for yourself and say something, right? But sometimes like having arguments with people for no reason is actually going to make things worse and maybe even make problems where there weren't any problems in the first place. So this is why Saturn benefits Mars, but it doesn't happen the other way around, unfortunately. Mars is of no benefit to Saturn in a way. Saturn doesn't benefit from Mars at all because Saturn is in its weakest position in Aries, Mars' sign, for example, which they both aspect now. Saturn doesn't benefit from Mars in that structure and stability and safety don't benefit from like breaking it all up, breaking the mold or pushing through something or challenging someone. It's like we want to feel safe. That's Saturn. And we're going to both want to feel safe and also want to break through our boundaries in February. And it's going to be quite complicated to be able to do that because we're getting triggered left, right, and center. So basically, you can see how February is quite a complex month and it's really on the sort of knife edge here. And we really need to be mindful of how we do things and we do it deliberately and very focused. Otherwise, things are likely going to escalate and we create more problems than we solve. So think about that for your own life, and let's hope that these situations are dealt with in a more mature way by leaders around the world and that it doesn't escalate and become a major issue. The last thing I want to talk about are the nodes in Pisces and Virgo. And I wrote an article about this, but essentially Rahu in Pisces has historically meant major swings up and down in terms of aviation and maritime issues. For example, Rahu in Pisces historically moved in the same week that I think it was literally a couple of days or day before the Titanic set sail. That's Rahu in Pisces. It's like big, big, big idea, and then it sank. Or another one was when the first woman solo traveled across the Atlantic in a plane. And then a few months later, that wasn't talked about so much. Her plane was down and she was killed. So there's this kind of major swings up and down with Rahu in Pisces, and Pisces representing the sky as well as the ocean. So we might see, well, we are seeing a lot of issues around planes, literally bits falling off of them, and some down planes and people being killed. But we're also seeing major issues around ships as well. And of course, what's happening in the Red Sea is obviously now in this context worrisome, because if you place this in the context of everything else I mentioned and surprise attacks and things escalating, this Rahu and Pisces with the whole shipping thing is where I think we might see some major issues in February escalate and really like literally it's like a bottleneck thing, and it's like it just explodes. So we have to be really mindful of this as well. It's interesting as well that the biggest ever cruise ship in the world has been launched as I speak, like a day or two ago, from the port of Miami. So this is again Rahu and Pisces. So I'm not saying that that's going to sink. I'm just saying that it's this just big idea that maybe sinks in another way, that it doesn't take off, or it's not as popular as they hope, maybe financially, that they were hoping for it to be like a major success or something. Or even I'm already seeing reports about it that, they're questioning the sort of climate thing around it. It's like, how does this massive ship affect, all the emissions and all of that? How does it affect the climate? So there's some protest against that in a way already. But whatever it is, whether it's ships or whether it's planes, and it's either or with Pisces, Rahu and Neptune now as well in Pisces, where we're going to see the eclipse in April. All of these issues are sort of like bottlenecking into this area of the zodiac by April. And so whatever escalates from February into March into April is likely to really kind of blow up in a bigger way. So it doesn't, even if it doesn't blow up in February, it's going to likely in the next few months. So I will go through all the signs sign by sign and look at how this is affecting all the other signs. So if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe and you'll get notification of that. I will go through each sign and how that impacts you, because everybody is going to deal with this differently. What I'm speaking of here, obviously, is just generally for everybody and looking at what's happening in the world at large. And also, if you haven't already, I will encourage you to sign up as a patron, because you'll get a full report every month based on the transits of the sidereal transits, that is, of the month. And so I go through each transit in depth and each major lunation, the new and the full moons, and a chart on each. And yeah, you can read all about that in the full report. As well as that, I meet with patrons every month and we have a live discussion online and we speak about these transits. So patrons can ask me questions, or we can just have an open discussion about how it's impacting each person, either personally, or it's how it's impacting the world and how it may impact the world moving forward. So this month we're having a discussion on February 4th. That's Sunday. We always meet on a Sunday, either the last Sunday of the month or the first Sunday of the month, whichever is closer to the beginning of the month. So Sunday from 7 to 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. So again, if you wish, you can join up as a patron and join that discussion. That's not recorded. It's a private discussion with patrons only. And yeah, I hope you got something out of that. If you have any questions, of course, please feel free to post below. If you have any thoughts, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed that, please give it a thumbs up, give it a like. And I wish you all the very best for the month ahead. It's going to be quite an interesting month, to say the least. But again, there's a lot of strength here if you can channel it in a more productive, more helpful way for yourself, and kind of overcome your own blocks. Okay, that's it for now. Until next time.